Hello, I'm Jordi Puiggalí. I'm from Cytel. I'm the director of the Research and Security Department. My company is a spin-off of our research group on cryptography that the main focus was to provide solutions, how to apply cryptography on internet voting, especially to help the governments to introduce internet voting in their voting process. So my presentation is focused on introducing which are the different experiences made by the different governments about internet voting, how they approach the problems about security, about the concerns of security, since this is one of the main reasons that sometimes governments have problems to introduce internet voting. So if we see the different governments, how they introduce and in which they start, UK was the first government introducing internet voting with a series of internet voting pilots that were related to municipal elections. They started in 2002. They repeat in 2003, 2007 was the last year that they used internet voting in some municipalities. And after this, when there was a change of government, that they decided to stop these pilots. However, the first two countries that introduced internet voting, and they are still using internet voting at national level for binding processes, are Switzerland and Canada. Switzerland started in 2003. They introduced internet voting for referendums, municipal elections, cantonal elections, and also federal elections. They start with 3 cantons, Neuchâtel, Geneva, and Zurich. And nowadays, they open to the rest of the cantons to use internet voting and also start a new regulation in 2014 to verify which is the security of the different voting systems. If you are not certified, then you cannot use the voting system in this kind of elections. And Canada also started in 2003, but only on municipal elections. Nowadays, there is a debate to introduce also internet voting at state elections and national elections, but nowadays they are only using internet voting for municipal elections. Netherlands also made 2 pilots, one in 2004, another in 2006, introducing internet voting for overseas voters. However, they stopped pilots in the last one in 2006 since they also stopped to use electronic voting in polling stations, so they no longer made additional pilots. And Estonia started in 2005. Estonia also, it's an example that is well known, even they start later than the others. And in this case, the difference with the others is they start to introduce internet voting for national elections for the whole population. Okay. In 2008, Australia made a first pilot of internet voting for military voters. And the main reference in Australia are coming on 2011 that are related to the state of New South Wales. It was the first state introducing internet voting in Australia in a binding and regular way. They repeat in 2015, and currently they are also reusing the voting system of New South Wales for doing internet voting in other states. In Queensland, and now they're also Western Australia is thinking about using internet voting using the same system. Norway introduced internet voting in 2011, okay, in the municipal elections. They also use again in 2013 internet voting, in this case in national elections. However, there was a change of government, and the new government that was against internet voting when was in the opposition, they stopped to use internet voting on a national level, saying that there was no political consensus on using internet voting. However, since internet voting was introduced initially for municipalities, the municipalities in Norway, they are still using internet voting. So internet voting in Norway is stopped at national level for municipal and national elections, but municipalities are still using for binding referendums, internet voting, and they expect that this is growing. And this is more or less the landscape of the different countries that introduce internet voting. However, how they are introducing internet voting, how they are dealing with these security concerns that usually are stopping some pilots or stopping the introduction of internet voting in these countries. We can say that the initial pilots start focused more on how to protect privacy and integrity of the elections. And the first voting system were more focused on using standard security. That means protecting the communication channel using SSL, using standard security measures as firewall, access control, etc. This is what happens in England in 2002, also in Switzerland, in Geneva, the first voting system, and also in Canada. The measures that they were using from the point of view of security was standard security. However, first Netherlands and Neuchâtel in 2004 is when they start to introduce new security concepts. In Netherlands and also at the same time Neuchâtel, since the security here is accumulative. It's not that they provide only one property. What they are providing is the whole set of properties. In the case of Netherlands, they introduce end-to-end encryption. That means that the votes are encrypted in the same voting terminal. They are not only protected at communication channel. So that way, the privacy of the votes is preserved until they are decrypted by the electoral board. And Neuchâtel introduced anonymous tally. That means that they are preserving the privacy of the votes even in the moment that the votes are decrypted. Okay. And this concept in 2005 is when Estonia made its own voting system. When Estonia started to use internet voting, they only introduced with end-to-end encryption. They were not using anonymous tally. Australia in 2008 also introduced the voting system, but only considering end-to-end encryption. And Geneva and France in 2009 is when they start also to use anonymous tally. But which is the meaning of this concept? So let's assume that we have an election. We have different processes in the election. We have an authentication of the voter. We also have a vote selection, a vote casting process. At the end of the voting process, we are gathering the ballot box and we are checking that the ballot box is correct, that all the votes belong to eligible voters. And then we open the ballot box and decrypt the votes and perform the counting. So if we are using a standard security, mainly the measures that are used is SSL connection encryption between the voters, the voting terminals, and the servers, access control measures, checking that the integrity of the ballot box is correct, and a standard decryption process. But this is not enough nowadays. In case we are trusting a lot who is managing the infrastructure, so in case that there is any hacker or any security problem that get access to the infrastructure, then this person has full access and full privileges on the system. For instance, if we are just using an encrypted connection, an SSL connection, that means that all the selections made by the voter arrive in clear in the server. So if there is any attack, any vulnerability here in the communication channel, or there is any malicious attacker here in the servers, the privacy of the voter can be compromised, or the integrity of the voter of the votes can be also altered. So even if we are implementing additional security measures, encrypting the votes in the server, we still have these problems. So it is not possible for the electoral board to discern if this vote has been manipulated or not. So standard measures is well known that are not enough if we want to provide a trustful election. So this is the reason that end-to-end encryption was introduced. And end-to-end encryption was based on we encrypt the vote in the same voting terminal, so there is no way for breaking the privacy of the vote until the votes are decrypted. And the integrity of the vote also can be preserved digitally signing the votes in the same voting terminal. Okay? So in this case, votes are encrypted in the voting terminal. They can be transmitted through an SSL channel, but if there is any problem in this channel or if there is any attacker here, they only see encrypted information. Okay? So the risk of privacy then is more or less solved in this case, and there is no risk that somebody can break the privacy, and if the vote is digitally signed here, cannot also alter the envelope of the vote. So it's possible to detect any attack that is coming from any attacker. And the electoral board can verify the integrity of all the envelopes, and they can say, okay, this is not the correct one, so it can be discarded at the counting process. And this was initially introduced in the Netherlands in 2000, and Neuchâtel, Switzerland in 2004, adopted also in Estonia in 2005, and also Geneva was using this. Okay, but I say, it's enough that we are protecting the privacy of the votes? No, there is another problem. At the end, there is a decryption process and these people that are opening the envelopes, if they can correlate the envelopes with the voters, it's easy for these actors to correlate the contents with the original voters. So we need also to ensure that votes are decrypted using an anonymous decryption process. And that means adding a new component before the decryption. That is a component that ensures that it's not possible to correlate the contents of the envelopes that are decrypted with the original envelopes that were cast by the voters. So then it's not possible to trace back the contents of the vote with the original voters. And how this is usually done, okay? One thing that happens when you are encrypting a vote is like when you put your vote inside an envelope. The envelope is preserving the privacy of your vote. So encrypting is the same approach. You encrypt your vote, and it's like putting your vote inside an envelope that is a ciphertext. So it's not possible, if you see the ciphertext, what is inside the ciphertext. However, what happens when you are encrypting something? That you are generating a unique fingerprint of your vote. And this is equivalent to say that each voter, when they are putting their votes inside an envelope, each voter has an envelope with a different color. So if you have different envelopes with different colors for each voter, and you know which is the color of a specific voter, when you open this envelope, it's easy to correlate who vote this vote. So it's important to introduce an anonymous process of that shuffles and also change the envelope, the color of the envelope when it's shuffled. This shuffling process is equivalent in a traditional election that before open the ballot box, shuffle the ballot box. Otherwise, if you open carefully, you know that the top vote belongs to the last voter. So it's a way for breaking this privacy. And the idea here is a similar one. Shuffle to change the order of the votes, but the difference here is that we want to also to change the color of the envelopes. And it's like saying, okay, I'm not only shuffling, I have a special gas in my ballot box that when I shuffle, change the color, there is a different reaction for its envelope, and then whoop, I have the same votes, but the envelopes change their color. So it's not possible now to correlate, based on the envelope, who is the original voter. So at the end, in the decryption process, they are opening votes from envelopes that cannot be correlated with the original ones. And it's a way to preserve the privacy. This mechanism is one of the examples of mechanism use. It was used, for instance, in Neuchâtel in 2004, in France, in Geneva, and Estonia now it's planning to use this process, since Estonia is still using a standard process of, no, I don't put information in my envelope, so I decrypt the envelopes, but you trust me. But they are now planning to do this to improve the privacy of their systems. But okay, at this point we have privacy and integrity protection. We are also protecting the privacy of the voters when we are decrypting the information, but is this enough? Okay, we are relying on cryptography. with this process. So what happens is the software that is encrypting or the software that is shuffling and decrypting the votes is compromised. They can, for instance, when I encrypt my candidate, they can change the candidate and encrypt another one. So how can I control this, that the software is behaving properly? And this is a second step of security requirements that were introduced by the governments. How can I audit this process to be sure that they are working properly and they are not manipulating the election when the votes are encrypted or when the votes are decrypted? Okay? So this is the next step of improvements on security that were introduced by the governments. And this new step was initially introduced by Norway. So Norway in 2011, when they start the tender process in 2009. So 2011 is when, for first time, was used the voting system that they proposed. They have cleared that in an election is not enough to protect the privacy and the integrity. Another important aspect of an election is that it can be auditable. So in a traditional election, you have observers, you have independent auditors that are checking that everybody that is participating in the election are not making any tricks, they are not manipulating any votes, etc. So we need also this kind of auditability in an election, in an internet voting system. So they introduced two new concepts: individual verifiability, universal verifiability. Individual is that the voter can check that the encryption of their vote is correct, that the encrypted vote that is sent in the server and stored in the ballot box really contains the intention of the voter. And universal verifiability are related to the processes that are implemented during the counting process when the votes are decrypted and counted, that this process is not changing the vote. And this is universal since this is a process that can be done by any auditor and any observer. Estonia adopted individual verifiability in 2013. They are still not using universal verifiability. They have plans to introduce this in the new voting system. Geneva and Neuchâtel, they also introduce individual verifiability. So at the moment, the one that is providing the level of universal verifiability is the Norwegian voting system. But what means these concepts of individual verifiability, universal verifiability? Individual verifiability introduces a new step during the voting process that allows the voter to check that the vote that is going to cast, that the ciphertext that contains the voter intention really contains the selections made by the voter, and that this vote has been stored in the ballot box. So it's a new process that can be done by the voter to audit that the voting system is not making any trick. And that means that the process of encryption is verified in the voting terminal, and also that the process of storing the encrypted vote in the ballot box can be also verified by the voter. And how can this be done? Let's see how it was implemented in Norway. In Norway, voters receive what is known as a voting card. A voting card contains all the possible options that can be selected by the voters with a code. Well, I put 6 numbers. At the end, they were using just only 4-digit numbers, and each number is different for each possible voting option. And each voter receives a different voting card. So another voter has a different number for the same voting option. Okay? And why they receive this voting card? Since when they encrypt the vote, the encrypted vote is received on the server. Okay? And the server has a key that performs a cryptographic operation again over this encrypted vote and send the result of this operation to another server that makes a second operation. The result of this mathematical operation is a long number. They only take the last 4 digits and send the last 4 digits to the voter. Okay? And then the voter can check if the result of this operation is related to the return codes that they have. Okay? Why this works? Since at the end, an encryption is a mathematical operation. And any mathematical operation will depend on the contents that you are operating. Okay? So These all operations, the result of this operation will depend on the selection made by the voter. If the contents of the encrypted vote were a different voting option, the voter will receive the return code of this voting option, okay? So it's a way for the voter to check that, okay, the server returned me this return code, that means that the content of the vote is the selection that I made. Okay? If returns a different code, the voters say, okay, it's not my selection, and can stop the process and don't cast the vote. And this operation preserves the privacy of the voter, since all the operations are done over the encrypted vote. So this server doesn't know what is inside the encrypted vote. They say, I make this operation, this is the number that I return, I send the number to the voter. Only the voter knows how to correlate these numbers with the real options. So there are not codes here stored, and these numbers are different for each voter, so there is no way for the servers or for anybody that is spying these channels to discern the meaning of these codes, okay? Only the voter. So this was the way that was implemented in Norway in 2011. Estonia introduced also a similar method in 2013, and Geneva in Switzerland, they are using in 2015. Okay? And this is just to detect that the encrypted vote received by the server really contains the selection made by the voter. But we want also to verify that the server is storing the encrypted vote. So how can this be checked? So each time that the server is storing an encrypted vote, it publishes in a bulletin board. This is like a public website. Nowadays, people is talking about using blockchain, for instance, to store this kind of information. And the server make a fingerprint of the encrypted vote and publish this fingerprint of the encrypted vote in this bulletin board. At the same time, the voting client, when the server confirms that the vote is stored, give a voting receipt to the voter. That is also a fingerprint of the encrypted vote that has been sent. During the election, the voting server is publishing the fingerprints of all the votes that are stored in the ballot box. And at any moment, the voters can go to this public website and look for if the fingerprint of the vote is present. That means that, okay, my vote is stored there. To check that the server is not making any trick and is trying to, and is publishing a fingerprint of a vote without storing it, auditors can cross-check that all these fingerprints belong to valid votes that are stored in the server. So it's a way for auditing that everything is stored properly and there are no problems of the integrity of the ballot box. And this can be done by the voter. So now the voter can check that all these operations are implemented properly, that all the votes are stored properly in the ballot box. What about the counting process? Universal verifiability is a new process that is added during the vote decryption and counting that will allow observers, so anybody that wants to observe this process can go there and say, I want to see that this process, that this shuffling and re-encryption is not changing the content of the ballot box. So there is a verification that the ballot box is the original one that has been generated during the voting process, and the anonymization and decryption are done in a proper way. How this is done, for instance, in Norway. So in Norway, well, we have a bulletin board with all the fingerprints of all the votes that has been generated. This is public. So the election is closed, we have encrypted and digitally signed votes, and then we proceed to shuffle or encrypt the votes just to anonymize these votes. And this process is generating a proof, a mathematical proof that says, okay, we have here a new set of encrypted votes, am I proving with this that the contents are still the same? It doesn't matter that now are in a different position, I re-encrypted them. This is a mathematical proof that can be used to say, okay, I'm not changing the votes, I'm not giving a new set, a different set of votes. And during the decryption process, a similar proofs are generated. In this case, are proofs that say, okay, this is the content of this encrypted vote, and you can verify it with this proof. that I'd say, okay, I have here a vote for candidate 1, I decrypt and say, okay, I will say candidate 2. I need to prove that the content of the ciphertext was candidate 2. So these mathematical proofs are based on mathematics, so are impossible to generate unless you are giving the proper one. And this is the property that is used for auditing this kind of election. So at the end, then we can decrypt, count. But what happens, how can we audit an election using this proof? Starting with the bulletin board, auditors, observers can go and say, okay, this is the set of the votes that has been counted. Are all these votes, all the fingerprint of these votes present in the bulletin board? Yes, okay, perfect. So this is the correct set. If any vote is missing, they can detect here. If there is any additional vote, they can detect here, since there is not a fingerprint in the bulletin board. Then the observers take these proofs, take the original ballot box, the result of shuffling and re-encrypting, and then making the mathematical operation. They can check that if the proof is correct. Okay, perfect. And they can do the same for the decryption proofs. So at the end, using mathematical formulas, then it's possible to audit that all the contents that are here belong to these votes without correlating votes with voters. We know that the contents are the same, okay? And this is a way for auditing elections that was also initially introduced in Norway, Neuchâtel Fribourg, they are currently using, and Estonian Geneva announced to implement in the new voting system that they are preparing. Okay, so now we can protect the privacy, integrity of the votes. We can allow the auditability of the election. So, which are the new things that are introduced? Well, vote correctness is one that is introduced in Switzerland, and the proposal is how can, when the server receives an encrypted vote, how can discern if the contents are valid? So that there is no attack that is trying to introduce some information in the vote, that when you decrypt the vote, you see, oh, it's an invalid vote. So how can we detect that the votes are valid or not without decrypting them and without knowing which are the contents, okay? It's something complex, but we are here working with mathematics, and it's possible. Another thing that also has been introduced in Switzerland, that is what is known as provable security. And provable security is a mathematical proof that can be used by mathematicians or cryptographers to check that the protocol, that the cryptographic protocol that you are implementing on your voting system, really, it's really compliant with all these properties. Since I can say, maybe I'm from marketing and say, okay, my voting system have all these properties, but how can you prove it? Okay, so one of the things that is asking for in the Swiss Chancellery, that is, if you say that you have these properties, you need to generate a formal mathematical proof, the proof that these properties are there. And this is something that we are working now in Fribourg and Neuchâtel for the certification. Okay. The last one, well, this is something more medium, long-term, is long-term privacy. And this is something that is more now in the academia side. We are also working on this. But here the idea is, okay, we have encrypted votes with the current algorithms. But in the academia, it's well known that these algorithms are secure since the current computers are not able to decrypt the vote since they need a lot of power that is now impossible. However, what is going to happen in the future when we have quantum computers? Quantum computers will be able, in a matter of minutes, to decrypt any information. So if they are able to decrypt any information, that means that maybe the votes that now are secret in the future will not be secret. And maybe somebody, now in the era of big data, can start to make analysis and say, okay, here I know which has been the voter intention during the elections of Barack Obama or any other person, that maybe he wants to keep the privacy of the intention. So here, the idea is, which are the good properties or the good approaches for preventing this. Don't publish encrypted ballot box, so maybe in the future they can be decrypted. And we are also working on algorithms that are known as post-quantum algorithms that will not be able, even for quantum computers, to decrypt information. But this is the future, okay? And this is more or less the evolution about security on the different governments and the different properties nowadays that are accepted on their pilots. So if you have any questions.
Just one question about the quantum computer thing that you were talking about in the end. You just delete the information.
Yeah, well, this is the idea, but no, but the different, when it's easy to prove this with paper, okay? You can say, okay, I have here the information, and if I destroy the paper votes, I have no more information. But the problem when you are dealing with electronic votes is that you can make as many copies as you want. So can you ensure that nobody is keeping this copy? You publish something on the web, and automatically Google see it, index it, store, and so it's something that you need to consider that maybe it's not seen now as a risk, but maybe it could be in the future.
No question?
How will vote correctness only will these voters allow the voter to change their mind and vote again?
No, vote correctness, it's a process, for instance, that allows you to check that the contents are valid, okay? If not valid, then the voting system say, okay, your vote is not valid, try again, okay? This is something that is possible. Based on our experience, you cannot control completely the voting system, the voting device. Recently, we have problems with the last update of iOS 10 that has a problem with JavaScript that then generates a bad encryption. So vote correctness allows to detect this, and then warn the voter saying, okay, there is something wrong here, try again. So that voter is not losing their vote in case that there is any any problem on the voting device.
Okay, we'll take 2 more questions.
What are the requirements of the end-user equipment? I mean, does the voter need to be seen? I mean, that it's the voter himself and not someone else?
No, now, for instance, in Norway, since we were using JavaScript, okay, voters were able to use any kind of device, computers, mobile phones, tablets. So any device that has a browser with JavaScript can be used from anywhere.
Last question.
How can you prove that the result of the election is actually based on the valid data?
With this proof, with this mathematical proof.
Yeah, but how can you prove that it doesn't just output something else?
Unless you actually wrote the code yourself.
Yeah. So this is usually something people think, okay, let's publish the source code, and then this. And this is a good practice, but it's a good practice from the point of view of transparency. You will never guarantee that your code is free of security issues, okay? And this is something in Norway, all the source code was public available, okay? So, but if you publish your source code, it's important also that you are providing this proof, since these are mathematical proof. So, for instance, the ciphertexts, you can check that the ciphertexts are the correct ones, okay? If there is any change in the ciphertext, voters discover this, so they can stop the process. So you can check that all the votes, all the encrypted votes belong to valid voters, and all the contents are correct. And since you have this bulletin board that is a public place that everybody can check the fingerprints of the vote, you can ensure that, okay, I have an original and ballot box. If I try to manipulate any vote, then I will invalidate the digital signature and the fingerprint will not be there. So it's a way for auditors to check that all the encrypted votes are correct. And all this mathematical proof as it's something that is public. It has been reviewed by cryptographers, and they say, okay, if I have here an encrypted vote with candidate 1, and then I put here an encrypted vote with candidate 2, I cannot generate any proof that when I check it, it will be valid. So if you multiply 2 and 3, you have 6. If you substitute and you multiply 3 and 3, you will have 9. And then we say, oops, the result is not correct. So it's based on mathematical operations that cannot be manipulated.
Ever read a paper called Reflections on Trust in Trust from Communications of the ACM? It's a very famous paper about trust in code.
Yeah, and this is the reason that these mechanisms are usually known as software-independent mechanisms. So you are independent of the software. You take the data, you take an encrypted vote, and you have the output, you have the proof, and you can make your own code for making the verifications, since the mathematical formula are public, okay? So you don't rely on the code that we are providing. You can make your own code. You know that the formulas are this one, so it's and you have the inputs and outputs of all these formulas that are published, so are able for everybody. So you don't rely on the software. You need only to trust that this mathematical formula cannot be manipulated. So if you change the contents, you will have a different output, and then we detect that the election has been manipulated.